Hello, I'm Olga. Today I'm going to be showing you how I made this dress that I'm wearing that you can't really see. It's actually a dress from the Burda 1021 magazine. It's actually this one on the cover. Is dress 118. What they recommend to make it with is like brocades and stuff like that, but so I actually have made this dress 3 times now, including this one, and all of those times, one time I used like a linen cotton blend, another time I used just plain cotton, and today I used again cotton, but so I haven't, sometimes I've lined it, sometimes I haven't lined it, and both things have worked for me. I really think it's a great design. So this time that I made this, I actually did a cute little like bow strap thing. The idea for this is that this was my birthday dress. My birthday was a while now, but I always love making myself a new outfit for my birthday. So the idea that I had for this was actually to make this bodice and this skirt but add exactly this sleeve, but that didn't really work out. I will leave this dress linked below. I think you can buy just this dress pattern from them online. I didn't really follow the instructions. I don't like Burda instructions generally. Like some of their Burda style like patterns that you can buy the pattern itself, some of those are fine, but most of their instructions are not easy to follow. Even for beginner pieces, even for simple pieces, the language that they use isn't, like the wording is clunky to me. They have changed them now, so to make them more easy to follow, but their designs and the pieces are really nice. I really love their clothes. They normally fit me really, really well. I never really have fitting issues with their clothes, so that's a really big bonus for me. And the other big bonus is that it's really accessible. So you have a subscription, you get the magazine delivered to your door every month, and you have all of these patterns for relatively cheap, because obviously you're getting all of these things for the price of one magazine, which is like €5 or something. But yeah, the cool thing about collecting the magazines is that maybe I'm not going to make everything that is in the magazine straight away, but maybe at some other point in my life I want to make this thing, and I know like I probably have a pattern for that in my collection of magazines. So I think that's a really good good bonus to have in that. So things that you're going to need to make this dress. This is a yarn dyed cotton that is like a red gingham lining fabric, whatever lining you want to use. I used a white cotton poplin, which is exactly the one I'm wearing in this top. I made it with leftovers. So yeah, the dress is fully lined. I'm gonna pass the torch on over to voiceover Olga, and she will talk you through the process and what I did whenever I did this, which was a long time ago now. The first part of the process for me was to try to draft my own sleeve, and I used the Vogue 8772 short sleeve pattern to start off with the basis. And this was because I was worried about shaping the arm side, and looking back at it now, that was actually what made this not work, because obviously I had an arm side that was working for a top and not for this kind of bodice dress. Anyway, so the way that I was doing this was I basically cut off some paper. This is just plain white craft paper, and I trace off the sleeve into my white paper. So I basically trace over the whole sleeve, including all of the notches, all of the information that's on the sleeve. And then I mark the halfway point and cut that in half. And then basically I add some paper in between those two halves, and that's kind of how I did it. I was going to gather the sleeve at the top and the bottom, so really all I cared about was the fact that I would have like still a roughly kind of sleeve shape, but I think I do want to try this again in the future, so maybe we can try this again. But yeah, I feel like probably the arm side was my undoing. Once I'd figured that out, I measured out my arm and the place where I wanted the cuff to land, and kind of moved it around to make sure that I had enough room to move afterwards. And I grabbed some more paper, and I basically drew a line with that measurement. Obviously I had to cut the paper in half, but it doesn't matter. So here I'm just going to be making the cuff, the little cuff that goes on the end of the sleeve.
So I drew a line that measured how much I needed, how much it went around my arm. And then I figured out how tall I wanted the cuff to be as well. And I drew that. And then I just added seam allowance. Normally I add 1.5 centimeters, which is 5/8 of an inch. After that, I cut out all my fabric pieces. And yeah, I used my sleeve. I used all of the pieces from the dress and make sure that the grain lines are correct. There's a lot of small parts in this pattern, so it's quite important to make sure they're all standing in the right direction. But yeah, fairly simple, straightforward stuff. After cutting the pieces, I like to mark them. Here I'm doing a that's a heat erasable pen. I like to mark especially this pattern because it has so many small pieces that kind of look the same that I start to forget what is what, and this is just to make it easier, and then that way I know what I'm working with. If I need anything to stay on for longer, so like buttonholes and things like that, I will mark it with a water-soluble pen or chalk or maybe a stitch mark just to make sure that it doesn't get erased when I iron it. And obviously I did both the cutting and the marking for the lining and the fashion fabric. So first I'm going to start with the bodice, and the first thing is I'm going to make the darts in the in this piece that is actually like the cups. So there's a little dart at the bottom, and I'm doing basically what I always do with darts. If you've seen any of my videos, you'll see me do this. I put a pin through both lines of the dart when the fabric is laying flat. Then I pinch the fabric and make sure that the pins are going straight and that the lines are aligned in parallel, and then I stick the pins through the fabric, and this is way easier than trying to get the fabric to sit properly like I used to do. Also, I apologize if you can hear in the background some wind gusts, but it is extremely windy today, and I think you can sort of hear it especially if you're wearing headphones, so I do apologize for that. For the actual dart sewing, you're going to start with the wide part of the dart, backstitch over here, sew through the line, obviously, and when you get to the tip of the dart, you don't backstitch. Leave so the thread's a little bit long, and repeat that for every single one of them. Then you're going to tie off those threads that you left long 2, 3, 4 times, however many you feel is necessary, at least 2. I like to do 3 or 4. And then you can cut off the excess thread. Normally I do this even in things that aren't lined, and you cannot feel those threads, but because this is lined, yeah, it's not going to matter anyway. And with this method, I've found that I don't get that really sharp point at the end of the dart that I used to get when I was backstitching at the tip. Then to finish it off, you're going to press the dart with your tailor's ham. And I like to press on both sides of the fabric just to make it nice and clean and make sure it's really, really sitting exactly where I want it to sit. And that's it. Darts are done. To get started putting the bodice together, I like to start from the middle or like the center and work my way around to the back. So first I obviously had to figure out where this went, and I'm stitching the cups to the center fronts. The center fronts are not really a triangle, but they have a triangular sort of feel, I guess. So I'm pinning it first because obviously these are quite rounded seams, and then stitch, serge, press, and repeat for both the lining and the fashion fabric. I'm doing it all in one go. So then I pin those two together and form the center, and I'm not sure if this is the way that you're supposed to do it in the instructions, but it worked for me. So I make sure that the seams meet and stitch that down the front. And the reason I did it this way is that I could then lay the bodice down and make sure that I am sewing it properly. I found that really helpful. So now I'm laying the next piece, which is the side front, which has a very curved seam as well. And so I pin on both sides of both the lining and you know how it goes, both the lining and the fashion fabric, and stitch that down, finish the seam, press, move on. Then I did the side back, and this is where the seams get a little bit straighter. Actually, I had a moment here where I was wondering if I should or shouldn't make this smaller, because in the past I had to make alterations to this bodice to make it fit me, but I have since had some weight fluctuations where now the bodice fits me perfectly out of the, without alterations. So I had to go back and alter the dresses that I'd already made and didn't need to alter this one. So yeah, and anyway, turns out I wasn't serging. I was trimming it with my pinking shears, and that's fine. Either way is fine. Obviously using my tailor's ham to press and all that. So yeah, then we move on to the back, center back, and I think that will be the bodice done. At this point, I decided to stitch the lining and the fashion layer of this together, of the bodice. I only stitched the top, I believe, because I knew I was going to put a zipper in the back, and I'm going to obviously need to finish that, and then obviously also going to be adding skirts and whatnot. So I did just stitch the top. However, if I knew that the sleeves weren't going to work out, I would have not done it like this. And also, actually, even if the sleeves worked out, because I was going to have to finish the sleeves off by hand, because I did it like this. But yeah, so this was a decision I made, I guess. It turned out fine because I didn't add the sleeves, and then I just, unpicked the areas where I added you'll see it later. So yeah, there's no really right or wrong way of doing things in sewing. I think there's ways that you find comfortable and that work for you, and here I'm just understitching that. And I think there's ways that work for you, ways that don't, and things that work for different fabrics or different situations. It really depends on what you're doing. I don't think there's like a right or wrong way to make things. So yeah, I do think it came out quite nicely, so I'm not mad at it. And with the bodice done, it was time to start sewing the skirt. I always start with the pocket, so here I am attaching my pockets to each layer of skirt. And I actually have this pocket that I got from a pair of trousers, actually, because it has the straight seam at the top to attach to the waistband. And I think that's the best way to put pockets into skirts, is to also attach them at the waistband, because it helps distribute the weight better and makes it just so that it doesn't get warped in your it means that your fabric doesn't warp, like the skirts don't warp when you're putting something heavy in your pocket. So yeah, I stitch it down, press, and then understitch the pocket as well. Then I lay the back and front of the skirts with right sides together and make sure that my pocket seams are meeting, because if they're not, that's going to be visible out on the outside. And I like to pin all the way around the pocket and also pin all the way down the skirt, making sure that, as you can see in this bit of footage, that seam right there meets at the bottom of the pocket, because that one's quite hard to get aligned if you don't have it pinned. So yeah, I just pin it all together and then stitch all the way around the pocket. I don't normally stitch the top bit. I just stitched around the pocket as normal, and then all the way down the skirt, and finish that seam as usual. Then I attach the skirts to the bodice individually. So I sew the lining onto the lining and the fashion fabric onto the fashion fabric of the bodice. And again, watching this back, I'm like, why didn't you do it all separately and then stitch them together at the end? But I don't know. I didn't know what I was doing. I don't remember why I did it this way, but I have a dress that is really beautifully finished, and probably one of the dresses that I own that is most perfectly finished. So I maybe I was doing something right. I don't know. And when I was stitching down or pinning the fashion layer, I made sure that I pinned the pockets to the right direction. So you have to pin the pocket to the waistband, and you have to make sure that the pockets are facing the front of the skirt, because otherwise you're going to have pockets in the back and not pockets toward the front. And another thing that I do is when I want my seams to match really perfectly, I put a pin on either side of that seam, and that helps it stay put and like makes it easier to pin than if I try to pin through the actual seam. And at this point I decided to stitch in my zipper. I'm attaching it to the fashion layer, and then I put my zipper foot in. That's really important, especially an invisible zipper foot. It's kind of hard to say. So I stitch that in, make sure that I get the actual zipper pull out of the way, all that good stuff. Stitch that in. I think I'm using a 40 centimeter zipper here, and then stitch it to the other side again with right sides together. And then I like to give that a really nice press quickly just to make it sit nice and flat. And then I went ahead and closed the back of the seam of the skirt, stitched over the zipper a little bit just to keep it closed and in place. And then I stitched the back of the lining skirts up until the point where my zipper was going to come in, and I pressed that open and also pressed the seam allowance in on the opening for the zipper. And that's just to make it easier to stitch in to the zipper later to like close that seam. And when I was thinking about what I wanted for this dress, I decided pretty early on that I didn't want any visible top stitching. So I'm going to be attaching the zipper, the lining to the zipper by hand. I'm doing a really quick slip stitch here, actually attaching it to the zipper tape, not to the fabric. So that way it definitely will not be visible on the outside. Then it was the next day and I moved on to sleeves. My idea was to have a strap type of piece that connected the bodice front to the bodice back like a normal strap, and then the sleeve would fall into this and would be sewn onto this as well as the kind of underarm of the bodice. And I had this vision. I've seen dresses like this. Obviously, it's going to have to be a different sleeve cap, but so this was my vision. And I have the straps here. I'm cutting them out and making sure that they would be enough. And I'm kind of like trying to do math or whatever here. And then I gathered the sleeve at the top and at the bottom, put 2 rows in there just to make it easier to work with later. And then I decided that this was the right time to stitch the cuffs closed, and spoiler alert, it was not the right time. It was better to attach them to the sleeve first and then do this, but there's no wrong or right way. There's just, in this case, the easy way and the not so easy way. And then I did the same thing for the sleeves, closed the underarm seam. Then to put the sleeve and the cuff together, I first tied off one side of the gathering threads and then pull on the other until it was the same size of the cuff, basically. Then I pinned that, making sure that the underarm seams are matching, and I actually moved all the gathers to the opposite end, so the end that's going to be on the outside of the arm, and pinned all of the gathers in that place. I thought that would give it a nice little puff, and I actually really like this sleeve, and I'm quite sad that it didn't work out for this dress. But don't worry, because this sleeve is going to get a redemption. We're going to make it work for something else. Maybe not this specific fabric, but a different one. Who knows? Maybe there's an Easter egg in this video. Who knows? To finish the cuffs, I press the seam allowance into the cuff, and then I fold the cuff and press that in place as well, and press the seam allowance on the other end of the cuff, on the other edge, to make it easier to close that seam. And in keeping with my no top stitching visible for this dress, I closed that seam by hand with slip stitches as well. Now I had to actually figure out how I was going to attach the sleeve, so I'm just pinning it on the dress form to kind of visualize it better. Sometimes that helps me a little bit, and apparently I got it. So I was gonna do this the straps first, and then try to attach the sleeve onto the straps, basically. So I did this mostly by hand. I did some of it by machine, but I don't really want to go too much into it because obviously it didn't really work out. But yeah, basically I sewed the strap on, then attached the sleeve onto the strap and the bodice. But what happened was I did both sides. I did a ton of actual like hand sewing and stuff because I really wanted it to be invisible and really neat. And then I tried it on, and not only did it not fit and sit well on my body, I didn't like the way it looked. It looked weird. It wasn't what I had envisioned, so I just decided to scrap it. So I had to first unpick everything, obviously, and then I decided to cut out double the straps, so one for the front and back on each side of the bodice, and that way I would have a little tie at the shoulder. I wish I'd made it longer, but I'm quite happy with how it came out. If I changed it, I would have just made it longer. And what else? Yeah, I unpicked the understitching and the seam where the strap was going to go, and then I stitched it in. The actual strap making is, as you can see, just stitching with right sides together, the edges, the long edges of the rectangle, and then turning it right side out, and then pressing it. That's quite important to press it so that they have a nice finish. I also then turned in the edges at either side and pressed and stitched them, and yeah, then attached them to the dress. And I didn't get footage of this, but I did end up hemming the skirt by hand. First, I turned in the seam allowance on the lining and serged it and sewed it like normal. And then I turned in the seam allowance on the fashion fabric and hemmed that to the lining so that it would be one piece. And yeah, that took a while, but it was quite satisfying and I'm quite proud of it. So that's the finished dress.
So I hope you enjoyed that. It was really fun to make. It's a real shame that the sleeves didn't really work out. I'm not a great pattern drafter. I'm still kind of learning and dipping my toe into it. I like to try with little projects like this where if it goes wrong, I still have like a backup that I can use. So I will leave, as always, everything that I used linked below. So yeah, I think that's everything for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.